Well, it appears we might actually have a production kickoff date for Spider-Man 4, but I think this is going to be a cautionary tale, and I want to dive into a couple of reasons why I think Marvel should be really careful here and not go back to the same well too often. Well, if you've been paying attention to Hollywood, you know these strikes have really jammed up the production process. We recently got a resolution with the WGA strike, but the actors are still on the picket lines, and a lot of projects simply aren't moving forward. Now, we recently got a bit of news, and I put news in quotation marks because it's from a scooper, about the next Spider-Man film. Now, as many of you know, Tom Holland really was playing coy on whether he would return when he was promoting No Way Home and Uncharted, but this was obviously some sort of public negotiating tactic, and just before the writer's strike kicked off, it seemed like all the details were worked out. Now, what Daniel Rickman is suggesting is that in 2024, Spider-Man 4 will finally get in front of the cameras and start its production process, meaning we might very well see it in mid to late 2025, assuming all the strikes work their way out. Now, this all sounds like pretty good news, even though none of it's confirmed for Marvel Studios or Sony or anybody that's official. We always like to be careful with scoopers, but these reports do come with some other interesting details that I think we probably should be a little cautious on. Now, as of right now, what we're hearing is Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, who wrote the first 3 movies, will indeed be returning for the next chapter and probably the next trilogy. There's also reports that John Watts, who was attached to Fantastic Four but decided to give superheroes a rest for a little while, will also be back to direct the next Spider-Man movie and more than likely will probably be tied to the rest of that trilogy. Now, all of this sounds like pretty good news if you like those first movies, and honestly, for the most part, I thought they were pretty great. But I think we need to be careful here with Spider-Man, because if we return back to the same story well, it might get a little bit boring. Not only is Tom Holland returning, but we're also hearing rumors of Zendaya, along with Jacob Batalon returning as Ned Leeds. Add in most of the original creative team, and it seems like you have a great continuation of those original films, and that could be how it works out. But here's the part where I think Marvel and Sony need to be very careful. That trilogy and story had a really definitive ending, and it appeared Peter Parker and Spider-Man had entered a new chapter of his life. We got the new costume, Peter was on his own and growing up, and by the time we get into the next trilogy, we're likely to see him in or graduating from college. Now, by returning to those storylines from the original films, including the ending with MJ and his friendship with Ned, well, honestly, I think it's a bit too soon. I think many fans want Marvel and Sony to explore some classic Spider-Man storylines, and if he does get to face off with the Kingpin with some of the other Marvel street heroes, we could be getting exactly that. But I do fear returning back to some of these old characters, especially his relationship with MJ, might feel a bit weathered. That whole story closed out with some emotion, and to simply flip it over in the next movie, I honestly think is way too soon. I would much rather see Peter progress in his life and maybe establish some new relationships. Peter Parker in the comics has a lot of love interest and a lot of characters that he could be interacting with. He very well could start dating Felicia Hardy or Gwen Stacy, setting up some great storylines in the MCU, and then eventually, maybe by the end of the 3rd movie, see Ned or MJ return to Peter's life and work their way back in organically. If we walk right into the 4th movie, with Peter resolving the relationships with these 2 characters, it's going to make the sacrifice at the end of the last movie have absolutely zero weight. Now, I like all these actors, and there's nothing wrong with any of them, but honestly, I want Marvel to be really careful here. Probably the only caveat I can say is turning Jacob Batalon's Ned Leeds into the Hobgoblin as part of the upcoming run could be fairly interesting. We did see some teaser concept art for Ned turning into the character for No Way Home, and I could see Peter's connection to him playing big and him trying to defeat the Hobgoblin, especially if Ned doesn't remember him. But will the Hobgoblin remember him? These are all things Marvel has to be careful treading through, and I want the Spider-Man franchise to remain strong and not go stale by returning to the same well. Now, there's no release date for this movie, but I suspect we won't possibly see it until late 2025 or 2026. This means a potential 5-year gap between No Way Home and the 4th film, which is the longest gap between Spider-Man movies that we've had since Tobey Maguire kicked off the franchise over 20 years ago. But honestly, I don't think it'll diminish the returns because people love Spider-Man.